So Meta just released a new WebXR tool that honestly completely blows my mind. It not only allows you to create sophisticated augmented reality and virtual reality apps using features such as interaction, scene understanding, and physics, but it's also completely free and quite easy to use. And this comes just at the right time, because in one of the last videos we talked about Eighth Wall, which is one of the most well-known WebXR editors, and they decided to shut down and wind down the business, which really raised concerns about the current WebXR tools that we have and how kind of safe it is to create maybe a more complex project in one of those tools with always the risk that maybe they will shut down the business and you've invested a lot of work into a project that might not be accessible anymore in the future. And so we needed something that is open source that will give us this safety. And I think that this Immersive Web SDK is it. So let's dive into it. The so-called Immersive Web SDK isn't just a 3JS wrapper, but it's actually a fully sophisticated SDK. And it includes a ECS system, which stands for Entity Component System. And if you're coming from web development and you are wondering yourself, what is the ECS system? It's essentially an alternative to the standard object-oriented programming, which splits data in between entities, which are just IDs for objects, let's say, components, which would be the data, for example, a position or a mesh, and systems, which would be the logic. And so splitting data and logic and entities in this way just allows to create much more performant applications, especially if we're talking about hundreds or even thousands of objects. Then an entity component system can deliver 10 times or even 100 times better performance compared to object-oriented programming. And this kind of approach will allow us to create even more sophisticated augmented reality or virtual reality games and apps on the web, which might be able to use hundreds or even thousands of objects that are being spawned or moved at the same time, coming very close to something that you could just build with something like Unity or Unreal, so kind of approximating a native performance. Although, of course, these engines that I just named will always have kind of the performance edge, but we're definitely getting closer to that with a ECS system. Moreover, we'll get a visual editor, which will allow us to pre-position and manage our assets and also import assets, adding components and behaviors just as we are used to in other engines. And this is pretty great as well. We also have a full-on scene understanding, which includes things like plane detection, meshing, semantic understanding, so understanding that we have a table or a chair or a floor, for example. Then we also have actually camera access, so we can use the camera image to run our own object detection or machine learning algorithms, for example, or do whatever we want, maybe like take photos or videos, so we have full-on camera access too. We do have a full-on augmented reality and virtual reality simulator, which allows us to test all of the experiences immediately within the browser, which is very, very helpful. This is something I repeatedly say, but kind of the iteration speed in which you can test new features in AR and VR needs to be increased. And this will only work with sophisticated simulators, especially in augmented reality. This is so important. And I'm so glad that the Immersive Web SDK has this feature. This just saves hours and hours of developing time, maybe even each week. And not only that, but it also supports progressive web apps, which means that you can essentially download the WebXR app. So when opening this WebXR app, you would go to a website, and instead of seeing a 2D site, it would essentially be the augmented reality or virtual reality experience. So progressive web apps and PWAs would allow you to download the current status onto your device. So you could just run that offline and even use, the current version of the website offline, which is extremely nice. And there's also some information about using in-app purchases, as well as wrapping it to become a native application, just as, for example, Electron does. So putting the web app into a wrapper, which would then make it a full app that you could offer, for example, at the Meta Horizon online store on the Meta Quest. And as we are WebXR based, this should also be cross-platform, right? So it should run across all XR devices that support WebXR, such as the Vision Pro, the Pico, or the Quest, and upcoming devices, and I think even the spectacles from Snapchat. So this is pretty amazing, and we also have a quite sophisticated documentation and API, which makes it pretty easy to get started. It's actually only like creating a standard new web project that you would do with something like React. So all you need to do is enter something in your terminal, and it will automatically download all the important files, and you can get started immediately. And it's actually super easy and super fast to get started. This is also kind of a criteria I use to rate XR engines or XR tools. How fast can I just get a simple scene running? And for the Immersive Web SDK, that was just extremely fast, which is super nice. And the best part, of course, about it is that it is completely free for personal and commercial projects. So you don't have to worry about any kind of costs or subscription fees or anything. You can just create your project and host it somewhere and distribute it, and you don't have to pay anything, which is extremely amazing for all that great features you get, and considering that this is only the beginning and will only get better. But of course, it's not all perfect. So let's talk a bit about the considerations we need to take. And the first one is that it's still quite early. I think it was only introduced last month or so, and we're currently on version 0.2. Which means there's still a lot to come, and people who are using React know that it can take quite some while to reach version 1.0. So it might be that with updates in the future, some things will break or change in the API, which means that it might be more work to update to newer versions. And I'm not sure if this is kind of already considered a long-term support version or not. But of course, we need to take into account that this is not kind of a version 1.0, and that we can't really say, well, how the upgrading will work in the future, and if there are any breaking changes, and so on and so forth. So then, of course, this is not designed for phones. So if you're looking to build a project that will run on smartphones as well as XR headsets, this is not a tool to use. But I also think that in 2026, we'll kind of gradually get into that new phase where there will be the first AR glasses and AR headsets, and we'll go over to actually building for these devices rather than building for phones. So it's kind of preparing for what's to come. But of course, if you wanted to build a project that will work on phones, then probably using something like Metacraft or the Zapper tools will be the best way to go at the moment. But if you want to build something that is rather for XR headsets, the Immersive Web SDK is actually perfect for that. Then, of course, the simulator is already pretty nice, but it's definitely not perfect. One thing I noticed in augmented reality, we can simulate rooms or meshes. However, we are not really able to move around with WASD, or maybe I also was just not smart enough to find out how it works, because the character immediately falls down, which means you have to change the XYZ coordinates manually at the moment. I'm pretty sure that this will change in the future. And of course, the environments you have are currently just gray meshes, and it would be extremely nice if we had some kind of Gaussian splats or something that we could just use as the AR environments to test the app, and maybe even load and use our own Gaussian splats. So then, of course, comparing this to something like Unity, if you want to build a super sophisticated and high fidelity VR or AR game, maybe with even multiplayer, then actually Unity is still, of course, the better choice. It's generally more performant, of course, using all the job system and their ECS system with C#. And then there are more building blocks and templates. The simulator in Unity is still better, of course, at least a little bit better in terms of augmented reality. For example, you have multiplayer in Unity, which I think you do not have at this moment, at least, in the Immersive Web SDK. So if you want to build something that's a very high fidelity, that's kind of a state-of-the-art VR or AR game, that is supposed to be released in the Meta Quest App Store, for example, then Unity is still a better choice. But if you, for example, just want to build a bit more of a simple game, and you can see some examples, they still look quite well. That might be single player or so. Or if you want to build more of a utility app, like an experience or a productivity app or something in augmented reality or virtual reality, something that does not need to have that absolutely highest level of fidelity and multiplayer and a lot of particle systems and thousands of objects spawning each second and moving, then the Immersive Web SDK is still a great and amazing choice. Another point is that with the Immersive Web SDK, you're still very much dependent on coding. So in Unity, for example, you have many ways to work visually, even within the logic, and use prefabs and templates and so on and so forth. But with the Immersive Web SDK, you do definitely need to get a bit into the code. You don't have to code that much, but there are just some things that are not possible just within the visual editor. So this is something to consider as well. But besides that, the new Immersive Web SDK from Meta is pretty amazing, and it's also a safe way to build XR experiences for headsets and glasses, since it's completely open source and free, which is one of my favorite parts about it. Alright, so that was a quick overview of the new Immersive Web SDK by Meta. I personally find it extremely exciting. It's one of the most interesting tools I've seen lately, but I also want to know your guys' opinion. I'm very interested in what you guys think about it. And if you want to see some tutorials about the Immersive Web SDK, maybe some kind of beginner's course, let me know in the comments. But until then, as always, thanks a lot for watching and see you next time.